guess I'll start by giving you a background on myself and why I took a gap year and why I'm still talking about it. But my role now is I am the Director of Outreach and Recruitment for an organization called Winterline that does formalized gap year programs. And there's a lot of different organizations out there I'm happy to talk about. But speaking about my gap year, for me, I knew pretty early on that high school was not my natural habitat for learning. It wasn't terrible, and my grades were all right, and I had friends, and I was playing sports and reffing games too. But I hit a point where I was kind of feeling like I didn't get any excitement from learning, and it got to the point where I was wondering if I even liked learning, which was frustrating. And for anyone who is doing a gap year for the same reason, you do love learning. I don't know your situation yet, but that was really where I hit. And I had the luxury of also being the youngest sibling in my family, and you too?
Yes.
Cool. Stay strong. Yeah, so my older brother is 5 years older than me, but he and I have a lot in common, and we always really have. And I got to see him go straight into college. He went to Allegheny College in Western Pennsylvania, and after a semester, he dropped out with 1 credit in, I think it was ballroom dancing or something, and it was totally not something he was interested in, obviously. And he ended up going back a couple times, so it was financially not the best way to do college, and then also just he was kind of floundering for a while, and I was thinking, okay, if I go straight from how I feel about high school to high school 2.0, then that would be really not the best use of time and money. And the other lucky thing was that my mom, until she retired, was a independent college counselor, and she has worked with tons of families who either did do gap years or should have, and she saw me as a very good candidate for it. So the one thing that she said I absolutely need to do if I'm going to do a gap year, and something I recommend to you definitely, is to apply along with everybody else and then defer for a year, because otherwise it's going to be on your mind the whole time. And I didn't even want to, but she was like, this is the way it's going to go, which was very smart.
And
so
do all colleges allow?
It is case by case at this point, but almost all colleges allow and in a lot of cases encourage gap years. And I believe every single Ivy League at this point is saying in your acceptance letter, would you like to defer for a year? And here's how to do it. So there are even some scholarships and things available for students who are going to take a gap year. And some colleges actually have their own gap year programs at this point. So Tufts down the road is one example. They have a 1+4 program. So if you wanted to, if you were enrolled in Tufts and you wanted to take a year to do community service or any number of things, it's a school-sponsored thing. So it's beyond accepted now. It's actually encouraged in a lot of cases. But definitely check with the school that you're planning on going to before you defer, to make sure that scholarships are still in line and all that good stuff. But anyway, so I knew, around sophomore year, like you, that I was pretty sure I wanted to take a gap year, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I was in a 2-summer leadership program at a summer camp in New Hampshire. And for part of it, I was canoeing the Allagash waterway in Maine, and I was with a buddy, a big group, but a friend of mine and I were looking up at Mount Katahdin, and he kind of nudged me and said, do you want to go do that? And it's the beginning or end of the Appalachian Trail, which goes from Maine to Georgia. And so this was sophomore year, and I said, well, I'm thinking about taking a year, so I definitely have time. But I was very much in high school mode, so I was like, you know what, I'm going to prom, going to graduation parties. I'm not going to do any planning, but I'm definitely going along with you if you want to. So he did all of the planning. He knew down to the nearest tenth of an ounce, like how much his backpack weighed and the food he was going to bring, where we were going to stop along the way. He knew everything, and I was just kind of along for the ride. But let's see if this works here. So we, on June 16th, 2006, drove I believe it's about 6 hours up to Mount Katahdin with my parents, and it was just dead silence, and to this day it was probably the scariest day of my life. Just because I feel like it's the day that I grew up. It was kind of high school, living at home, and then I'm going to go walk into the woods alone and maybe be in the woods for 6 months. So it's pretty intimidating. And Brayton and I were very, very quiet the entire way up. And that's the top of the first mountain there. And about 5 minutes in, I kind of collected my thoughts and I was like, all right, let's go. And I still didn't really know if I was going to be able to do it, but it was kind of like, all right, I have no plans for the rest of this year. I can at least fill the first 5 or 6 months, and we'll see. I'll take it day to day. So this is 5 days into our hike, and this is 2 years of planning and 2 years of his planning. And on the 5th morning, I wake up and I look over, and he's just sitting up in his sleeping bag like this. And I look over and I was like, "What's up, man?" He's like, "I gotta go home." And he just freaked out. And it wasn't physical. I mean, it was a little physical. It was peak black fly season, and we were just dripping blood, and it was terrible. But but it was really just the thought of, I'm going to do this every day for the next 6 months. And so like 1 in 10 people actually finish the whole thing in one go around, just because it's a lot to think about. I was lucky, and when he was quitting, had already met 2 other girls who had just graduated from the University of Delaware. And I kind of looked at them and I was like, I'll keep going if you keep going. And then the next night, we stayed in a shelter with the first guy coming northbound. So he had almost finished the entire thing. And he was telling all these stories that were pretty intense. And we wake up the next morning, and same thing. One of the girls was sitting up in her sleeping bag, just staring straight ahead. And she was like, "I got to go home too." So this other girl and I were like, all right, I mean, we don't know if we're going to finish, but we might as well try. So we'll keep going. And then quickly, I mean, it turned into the best community out of anybody. And it's really, the second you remove yourself from the structures of, high school, college, jobs, or anything, everybody's so outgoing, and everybody was in it together. So, and everybody's so different too. Like it's a community you're not going to meet anywhere else if you're on a gap year in general, I would say. So on here, like we have one guy who is an electrician, another was an industrial engineer, another one was a professional ballet dancer, the guy on the top right. We had a cop from Atlanta on the far left. We had students. We had a professional chef from Georgia. So really interesting mix of people along the whole way, and everybody really watched out for each other and supported each other. Of course it freezes. Maybe. Looks like we froze. Anyway, so it went from just absolute fear to this could actually work, and it was finally like, okay, I'm out of my parents' house, and I realized I can actually be independent and do my own thing. So, and along the way, it hit points where it was kind of like, all right, I'm alone in the woods again, and it's getting pretty slow, but always there would be something that came up. There was one time we came across a guy who had a heart attack on the top of the mountain. So our day that we thought we had planned out turned into an evacuation that took 16 hours or something like that. And then other points you kind of make your own gap year while you're going. So there was a point where we were bored, and we were around Pennsylvania, and there's a thing called the 4-State Challenge where you hike in one day. You hike 44 miles from Pennsylvania to Maryland to West Virginia to Virginia. So we did 44 miles, and just cause. So that part of the gap year was very, you knew the beginning and you knew the end. So it was very easy to sort of process everything that had just happened with graduation and where I wanted to go next. Not that I knew where I wanted to go next, because that can take a while, sometimes decades. But, there we go. So the Appalachian Trail was a really awesome start, and that's one piece of advice that I give to people. Whether you do a program or not, I definitely recommend finding something that is yours, and it's not organized by someone else. It's 100% your interest, and you want to pursue it. And I know that sounds weird since my job is to work with a specific program, but whether it's working a job during your summer of your gap year, or working on a specific skill that you want to figure out, or internship or anything. Find something that you design. And that said, do that within reason, because the next part of my gap year, I flew home to Boston, and
Did you hike the whole trip?
I did. So I finished November 13th of 2016. My goal was to get home in time for Thanksgiving so I could eat everything in the house.
Okay.
And I did eat everything in the house.
Yeah.
But I flew home, and I was out of money, and even though it was pretty inexpensive to just live in the woods for 5 months. So my first move was to go get a job, and since I had been living in the woods, I went to REI and had the easiest job interview of my life. It was basically, why do you think you're qualified to sell camping equipment? Said, well, I've been using it nonstop. So that was the entire interview. But I also temped at a few different companies, which I don't know your work experience, but beyond reffing, have you had any side jobs or anything?
I've helped teach places, but not.
Mm-hmm.
You have lots of little. She's
just
good.
like
She's good at getting little jobs.
Yeah.
Cool. That was me too. But yeah, for my gap year, I was like, all right, I need money quickly so that I'm not staying at home with my parents during my gap year. So I worked a few different jobs through a temp agency. And if you ever get the chance to do it once and no more than once, because they put you in the most ridiculous jobs. I worked at a light fixture manufacturing plant, so a factory. And it wasn't even like the lights, it was the metal grids that go into like in an office building or a school.
Yeah.
So that was one. I was working at a telemarketing company selling who knows what, and it was just awful. And I did it long enough to get exactly how much money I needed to do the next thing. But it taught me for sure the value of a college education. So, I mean, those were the jobs you can get right out of high school. And that was really valuable because it was a huge motivator to say, okay, maybe my education is worth something. So from there, this is where things got interesting. I was thinking, okay, the Appalachian Trail and working were all very me-centric. What could I do that would be involving other people or maybe even helping them? And I sat down with my parents and kind of gave off the very basic research I had done on I could build houses and do construction projects. I could work in a children's home or an orphanage. I could teach. And as we were talking about all these options, I was saying, well, teaching is really interesting to me, but it's also really terrifying because, like, I'm 18. Who am I to teach other people? And my parents stopped me and they said, well, if it scares you, you should probably do it because that means it's worth doing, especially during a gap year because it's relatively risk-free. It's 1 year. Nobody's waiting on you for it. So it's a perfect time to try it. So did a little bit of research and then also I had taken high school Spanish, so very basic Spanish. So I thought, okay, I could at least use that so I don't lose it. So I looked at Latin American countries and places to teach and ended up getting a one-way flight to Lima, Peru. And from there, took an overnight bus to a school in Huancayo, Peru, which is where I had looked it up online. Very different from the city, pretty rural. And the school, when I got there, was not what was advertised. Basically, I found a website, it looked legitimate, so I went, and I get to the owner's house, and after an overnight bus ride, and he was like, all right, what do you want to do? Do you want to go teach? And I said, sure. So he brought me up to the school. I was told I was going to have 12 students, and they were going to be 12 years old. I had 35 students between the ages of 4 and 18, and there was no door in the school. There were dogs and sheep in my classroom. It was one classroom for everybody, and he starts walking away, and I was like, what do you want me to do? And he just looked over his shoulder. He was like, yeah, just teach English. And that was my formal training for how to be a teacher. But fast forward a few years, and after college, I was a teacher. So that was what got me back into education, was trying it and seeing, obviously not the way schools work, but what it's like to interact with students in a teaching setting, even if it's not a legitimate school. But it was very frustrating because I had, paid for my flight down there and made it all the way out there, and it was just not a productive use of anyone's time. My first day I walked in and I said in basic Spanish, "What do you guys want to learn?" And I knew that every couple of weeks they were probably getting the same beginning of a lesson from some stranger. So it was not productive, but it was also what motivated me to get into what I'm doing now, and working with real organizations. So that's lesson number 2, is if you're going to do something that involves other people, find a program and do your research. Because otherwise, this is a very common story. If you talk to anyone who has taken a gap year and they've designed it on their own, if you go through an organization, there is an entire team of people with knowledge who can, whether it's Winterline or otherwise, they've done their homework and they know what's actually going to work. So I, from there, ended up just traveling around Peru. I taught for 4 weeks, and that was it. But I had met another guy named Frank who had a sociology degree, didn't speak English, and wanted to start his own school. So when I got back to college, I worked with some professors to write up a business plan for him, and now he's running a school down there. So, and it's working, actually. So it did come full circle, but it took a long time. But yeah, I sat down with him at one point and I said, "All right, I came all this way to try and help. What do you suggest I do?" And he said, "Honestly, the best thing you can do is get to know my country and my people and my culture, and then bring that back to your country." So he had never been to Machu Picchu before, which is what his country is famous for. So I took him to Machu Picchu. He has polio, so he wasn't able to hike it, but we took the bus up and we walked around. And it was an amazing place. And from there, I went to the jungle and saw really every single corner of Peru. I went to the Nazca lines and took the flight over them. So I got to know Peru really well, and I went to Bolivia. But again, it was I was doing all this amazing stuff, and I was like, I got to go swimming in the Amazon River, and I got to go zip lining, and I got to go up in a plane today, but what am I contributing? So it still hit that point. There are a lot of different forms that a gap year can take. It can be a job if you are wanting to, in a lot of cases, support your family or support your own education financially. It can be a job. It can be community service based. It can be skills building, which is another one where I definitely recommend a program, because you can get set up in some pretty amazing opportunities for skills building. This really got me excited again about new experiences and learning in general, and I brought that back to college. And my first semester back in college was the highest grades I'd ever gotten, because I didn't even know what I wanted to major in, but I was excited to find out, and that was the difference. So it sounds like similar motives, but there's a ton of different motives. There are people who have a 4.0 in high school and they've already gotten into every Ivy League, and they just need to take a step back and take a breath because they earned it. There are other people who just haven't really done much yet, but yeah, I think if you do have interests, a gap year is an awesome way to dive deeper into them and then pick them apart and decide what you want to do with them. And it may be the arts and it might not be. One of the programs we run is you learn 100 different skills in 100 different areas of interest, and there are students who are like, I'm going to med school, definitely, and then they came out wanting to do design, and they got hooked up with internships through the program. So it could totally change what you're interested in. And teaching for me was sort of on my radar, but not really. And then after that, even as much of a mess as that was, it was still absolutely, I want to work with students. And even though I'm not in a classroom anymore, I'm definitely still in the education area, and it's awesome. So, yeah, try. And it sounds like you're still trying as much as possible while you're in high school, but there's so many more outlets for it after high school, because then you're not sitting at a desk the whole time. So, you're almost there. Let's see what else I got here. That is sort of statistics for. It sounds like you're pretty open to it, but for parents who aren't, this is a great tool. 'Cause
I don't think my husband really knew what gap was.
Okay.
He was in Gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't any one definition, but it's really just intentional time away from school to pursue what you want to figure out. And the number one concern or fear that I see from families is, oh, if I take a gap year, I'm not going to go back to school. 90% of students do immediately, and then they're totally fine. Here, let me see what advice I've scrolled down here. Defer, definitely. So even if you're like, I can't even look at the Common App, I just want to run straight away from this, just suck it up and do it. It's going to make your life so much easier. And you can change schools. Even if you've deferred, you can change them. And yeah. I mean, you could, if you said, yes, I'm going to Hobart and William Smith or whatever school, but I'm going to go a year from now. If during your gap year you are kind of like, it's too small and it's too in the middle of nowhere, I want to go to a city and I want to go to a big school, because you changed, because you had new experiences, you can change. There's most likely a deposit that will get soaked up, but that's less than 4 years.
Go through a whole reapplication?
Potentially. That's another piece of advice. There are some gap year organizations that actually include college counseling, so they can actually help you with maximizing what fees have already been put into it, and then also just keep you on track for being able to start on time, even if you switch schools. Most people still don't switch schools, but I didn't either. But yeah, defer for a year, definitely. Variety, definitely, because it sounds like you have a lot of different interests, and you're good at them. So do it all and try to have as many components to your gap year as possible. You're not going to become an expert in any one thing in a year. So my advice is to try everything and then become an expert in college. Because you never know what random peripheral interest might actually end up being the focus. And on that note, do what scares you. It's pretty risk-free. Again, you're not locked into 4 years yet on any area of study, so just try stuff. And talk to everybody. Like I'm an introvert, but I haven't been an introvert since 2006, because now I'm like, tell me everything you know about what you do, and that started in a gap year. So yeah, just try everything, talk to everybody. And yeah, try a portion of it that's not through a program. And again, it could be like a month during the summer, and just build your own chunk of it. And then, yeah, the two components that I would say definitely do a program for would be anything skills-based, or community service. Because again, there's a market now for community service. It all started with good intentions, but high schools across the country and colleges said, we're requiring community service hours now. So that created a market for companies to pop up and just say, yes, you're going to go to Fiji and do really meaningful service, but you show up and they're like, paint this house for the third time this month, and they don't have a plan for you, and you're not actually helping. So there are a lot of really good community service organizations out there, and our programs just did a partnership with Startup Institute in Boston, so all of our students researched and put together their own business plans and pitched them to experts. Yeah, and it's sort of the same thing. So some of them were socially minded, some of them were just really cool business ideas, but it really pulled out the interest in everybody. So what other things? Scholarships, definitely. I mean, there's so many different outlets. Look at colleges. Some colleges will offer like $5,000 to a student who wants to take a gap year. And you can use it. I mean, you have to submit a proposal, obviously. They're not just going to hand it out. But submit a proposal of this, and that would totally, I mean,
Is there scholarships through the colleges? Or?
Some colleges, yeah. And I can, if I get your contact info, I can send you some. Some colleges provide scholarships directly. A lot of programs, my program, and most programs out there have scholarships for their own programs. And there's some private grants and things like that too. So if you start digging now, you'll have it by the time you get there. But don't overplan it also. So plan the scholarships and plan the big parts of it, but don't do the day-to-day stuff, because one example, like when I was on the Appalachian Trail, I was hiking at one point with a guy who, he had a day planner for his time in the woods for 6 months, and you could look at like September 14th, and he knew exactly what town he was going to go through and what time he was going to get into town to buy supplies.
That would never happen.
Yeah, but that was the thing, is I realized like people operate that way,
Yeah.
and it was really frustrating because, and I ended up not hiking with him because we got to a point where we were hiking along, and we met this couple near a road crossing, and they said, "Hey, we have a house 2 miles down the road. We will cook you a 5-course meal complete with steak and homemade ice cream, and we'll give you a bed for the night." And I looked at the guy and I was like, "Yeah, that's awesome." And he went, "Oh, no, I need to be at this shelter tonight." I was like, "Are you kidding me? This is an opportunity, and you're so planned that you're going to miss out on serendipity every day." So be open to it and don't overplan. But anyway, that's my preachiness. Thanks for coming.